Hi there and welcome once again to the Joe Roberts podcast. The title of today's podcast is Royalty and Homelessness, and in this podcast I am going to be talking about a recent interview in which the British Royal Prince William spoke about how he wants to end homelessness within 5 years. I thought this was a very interesting and important topic to speak about because it highlights a very important issue in our society, or it highlights actually a few important issues which I really think are red flags that need to be spoken about. So the first is royalty itself. The second is poverty and unfair distribution of wealth. And the third is homelessness. And they all sort of are woven together. The first thing that I want to address as regards these claims of his that he wants to end homelessness within the space of 5 years is a very obvious angle. And I'm not the first person to mention this. It's been mentioned in various TV interviews and there's been various articles and newspapers written about it, and I think it's something which will automatically pop into a lot of people's minds when they've heard this, and it's the angle of, isn't it a bit hypocritical for somebody who has an income of many millions to be talking about the subject of homelessness? Now, it's a very obvious angle and it's a very relevant one and it's an important one, and it shouldn't just be swept aside or treated glibly or just brushed aside in a sort of naive way, which is what I'm kind of seeing. So it's kind of the bottom line to the whole thing. Prince William is now the Prince of Wales and he is second in line to the throne in the UK. He will be king one day. And before that, he is a patron of a charity which is aiming to help homeless people. He has made the bold claim that he believes that homelessness, presumably in the UK, because it definitely can't be global, believes that homelessness can be ended within the space of 5 years. I think that is a very naive claim, but where he's concerned, I don't believe it is a naive claim. I think he's just talking. I think he's just throwing out sound bites which sound good, and I don't believe that he believes that homelessness can be ended in 5 years. It could, theoretically, but not in the way that he's claiming. I believe that homelessness could be ended in 5 years as well. I believe that it could actually be ended in a couple if we were to change the system radically. In fact, if we were to completely deconstruct the current system that we have and do away with both government and monarchy, I believe that we could very quickly redistribute all of the wealth that exists, and we could theoretically end homelessness in probably less than 5 years, but that's not what he's talking about. He's talking about ending it within the parameters of the current system that we have, and that just simply isn't going to happen. It reminded me of Bob Geldof's foolish claims as regards ending poverty in Africa back in the mid-1980s when he set up Live Aid and Band Aid, and obviously poverty does still exist in Africa. It was a foolish claim back then, and it's a foolish claim now, because in order to create these kind of changes you would need absolutely colossal paradigm shifts and a radical deconstruction of the current system that we have globally in order to end poverty on an entire continent. So it was foolish to claim that such a thing could be possible in the way that he was suggesting, i.e. by asking ordinary everyday people on ordinary everyday incomes to dig deep and sort of donate their money towards that cause, when, to the best of my knowledge, he didn't go knocking at the door of the world's billionaires. And the same thing applies here. It does carry the distinct whiff of hypocrisy, and I guess I won't be the only person to point that out, but I would like to make a few comments about it and sort of raise a few different questions which I think are important ones. And I think top of my list is, why is nobody confronting him with this? It's all very fine and well for people to talk just in ordinary everyday situations, or even for newspaper articles to write about this issue, and most of them will reach the conclusion that it's fine. It doesn't matter if it's incongruent for somebody that's, let's face it, a billionaire to be talking about poverty and homelessness. They'll still end with, it's okay, we'll sort of let him away with it. My question is, why is nobody saying to him, you're not the best person to be talking about this? There's lots of people in this world who are qualified to talk about this. I'm sure that there are people in this world who are famous, who have also been homeless. Perhaps some of them are qualified to talk about this. He has never been homeless. He's never even had the slightest experience of poverty. He is not qualified to talk about this. I guess the real problem is that you couldn't really find anybody less qualified to talk about this subject than somebody who is royalty. And the subject of royalty is something that I'll be speaking about in this podcast as well. He was raised by billionaires. All members of the royal family are billionaires. He is part of the inner sanctum of royals. He is grandson to the former Queen of England and is son to the current King of England. So he comes from a family of billionaires. He is about as far removed from poverty and homelessness as it is possible for any human being to be. So he is at the extreme wrong end of the spectrum of people who are fit to be talking about this subject. He claims that he is using his position in society for the greater good by highlighting this issue, but it will not work that way. I am not a cynic in any way, shape or form, but I am absolutely certain that unless there is some profound, unexpected, drastic change within the next 5 years that involves a deconstruction of the entire model of society that we currently have, they have absolutely zero chance of ending homelessness. And unless he has some plans to give up his royal title, persuade every single other member of his family to do the same, and they also plan to sell off all of their properties and all of their assets and donate all of that money towards trying to end it, he has absolutely no chance of doing so. That kind of also highlights the next issue that I would like to sort of bring into this, and it's he couldn't possibly have much more wealth. He comes from a family of billionaires. He has a royal title. He probably lives in a palace. He will definitely have been allocated one of the royal residencies to live in, and he will be worth many billions, and so are his parents, and so are his grandparents. He is not fit to be talking about this. He has no experience of it. I think that perhaps in Britain, people are either too polite or too intimidated to tell a member of the royal family that they're speaking about issues like this is incredibly inappropriate and foolish, and that it's going absolutely nowhere, nor do I believe that he believes it will. I am not a sort of gambling person, but I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that in the next 5 years, homelessness will still exist. In fact, I've actually heard reports that it's on the rise in the UK. So he lives off taxpayers' money. This is something else which needs to be spoken about. The royal family still receive taxpayers' money. They don't need it. Even if you were to withdraw all taxpayer funds from the royal family right now, they already have a massive acquired wealth amongst them, which is indescribable. You're talking billions, if not potentially trillions, if you add the entire royal family together. And that is simply unacceptable when you look at the fact that poverty and homelessness do still exist in our society. And any right-thinking person will see this and will not feel afraid to point it out. And I don't have influence or power in society, but I can still see this and I can still put the message out and hope that it will find somebody somewhere and that they will recognise the truth in what I am saying. Another point that I wanted to make about the subject of Prince William talking about the subject of homelessness was something that someone said to me in conversation the other day, and they reminded me of something quite interesting, which was that during royal events in recent years, such as royal funerals or royal weddings, and possibly even the Queen's Jubilee, it was the case that in London, in the areas where these events took place, the police were actually known to be moving homeless people out of the view of television cameras and the sort of procession and the crowds who were there to view these events. So this puts a sort of very interesting slant on the whole topic, because here is this person, this royal, this future king, talking about how he cares about homelessness, and yet it was the case, and it was known to be the case, that in recent years many royal events were orchestrated in such a way that homeless people were sort of swept aside and pushed into the darkened corners of society and pushed out of the view of the general public, so that we could sort of forget that they were there and focus instead on the pomp and ceremony, which is in many respects disgraceful, because this person's claiming to care about homelessness, and yet this is the kind of thing that's being done for the sake of royal events, which is a massive contradiction and really quite appalling. I would also like to comment upon the concepts of blue blood and divine right to rule, because they are relevant in this discussion. He is a royal, and therefore somewhere within himself he has to, on some level, believe in the concepts of blue blood and the divine right to rule. This is fallacy. This is a fiction. No such things exist. There is no such thing as blue blood, and there is no such thing as the divine right to rule. Neither exists. They are fictions. He is not a member of a royal family like we have in many countries in Europe who do not receive taxpayer money. I have no issue with those royals, provided they are not getting handouts from the government. I have no issue with the fact that they exist, and if they have some sort of function in society and they're doing something worthwhile in society, if they have some sort of value, fine. I don't have an issue with that. What I have an issue with is a royal family that are still taking taxpayers' money and are living in the highest level of luxury you could possibly imagine, and also have the audacity to actually talk about subjects like poverty and homelessness. And I cannot believe that there are people taking him seriously in this, and I'm really disappointed as well that there aren't people saying to him, look, why don't you put your money where your mouth is, literally, and give up some of your wealth and contribute it towards this cause and prove to everybody that you do actually care. Nobody will say that to him simply because he is a royal. There were people who accused someone like Bob Geldof of hypocrisy. He did actually face those accusations, probably because he's not royalty, and therefore more people will feel able to speak up and tell him that he was being hypocritical and naive and foolish, and also very disrespectful to the British general public, expecting them to dig deep when they live off ordinary incomes whilst not going to the billionaires of the world and asking them for a contribution to ending poverty in Africa. And the same applies to Prince William. If he is not willing to bring down his wealth level and contribute some of his wealth and some of his family's wealth to this cause, he is not somebody who is fit to be talking about this subject. Hypocrisy is a thing. It does exist. I can only imagine that people are not telling him this because he is a royal and people are too intimidated to tell him this. There's no point in people just talking about it or writing about it online or even in newspaper articles unless somebody is willing to actually tell him to his face, you're not the best person to be talking about this. You can highlight it, but let somebody else who actually has experience of poverty, or at the very least the real world, do the talking. There is no such thing as blue blood and the divine right to rule. They are a fiction. They are no better than the rest of us. They are no different to the rest of us. Their blood is the same as everybody else's blood. Their worth and value as human beings is no greater than anybody else's. All human beings in that sense are created equal in the eyes of God or science or whatever else you want to make the centre of your sort of way of viewing the universe. They have no more or less value than anybody else. They're just people, and they clearly don't see it that way themselves, or they wouldn't still be taking taxpayers' money, and they wouldn't be talking about poverty and homelessness whilst living in palaces and living off billions and billions and billions of pounds. It makes absolutely no sense logically, and anybody who has got all of their mental faculties about them can see that. Unfortunately, we live in a world now, people are too afraid to speak the truth in an unfiltered way, and people shy away from confrontation, even if that confrontation is calm and respectful. Poverty and homelessness, at least in the UK, could be ended within 5 years, but they won't be, because it would require a massive systemic change, a different type of system to be in place. But it's actually built into the design of our system that poverty exists. It is a system which is created with the idea in the background that poverty will exist and that some people will be living in poverty whilst others are living in very high levels of wealth. That's part of the design of this system. So you cannot possibly eradicate poverty and homelessness whilst that continues to be the case. The royal family are at the top of the list when it comes to people that are living at unnecessarily high levels of wealth, and there is absolutely zero justification for it. That's everything that I currently have to say on this subject. I thought it was an important issue which needed to be highlighted. I hope that you've gained something useful or interesting from listening to this podcast. Bye for now, and thanks for listening.